Eirik's axe stopped so close to the orc mother's throat that one black strand of her hair lifted against the blade. She knelt in the mud between two armies, one arm wrapped around a baby no larger than a winter loaf. Blood ran from a cut above her green cheek. Her other hand was empty and open, pressed against the earth to show she carried no weapon. Behind Eirik, 500 Viking shields waited for the blow. Across the broken field, the orc lines had gone still. "Kill the mother first," Jarl Stenvar said. His voice carried from the ridge without effort. "The child will follow." The mother raised her eyes to Eirik. There was fear in them, but she did not beg. That was what stopped him. Not the child, not the silence, not even the sight of two armies watching as if the world depended on one swing. It was the dignity in her face. Eirik had seen kings crawl. He had watched warriors promise gold, land, daughters, anything at all when death finally looked at them. But this wounded orc woman only shifted the baby beneath her cloak, turning her own body so the axe would reach her before it reached him. Eirik tightened both hands around the haft. The Vikings began striking spear against shield. One beat, then another. They were calling for blood. The baby looked up at him and touched the iron ring hanging from his beard. Eirik drove the axe into the ground. The sound cracked across the battlefield. "No," he said. For one breath, nobody understood. Jarl Stenvar stepped forward on the ridge. His white wolf cloak snapped behind him, and his expression changed from impatience to disbelief. "What did you say?" Eirik pulled his shield from his back. He did not face the orcs. He faced his own army. "I said no." A murmur moved through the Viking ranks. Men who had followed Eirik into burning halls and over walls, slick with blood, stared as if the dead had spoken. Eirik Wolfscar did not refuse battle. He did not question commands. He was the Jarl's red hand, the beast loosed when ordinary courage failed. That was the story they told about him. Perhaps he had helped them believe it. Stenvar descended one step. That creature carried messages through our lines. She carried a child. She is an enemy. She is a mother. The sharp breath Stenvar drew was quieter than the army, but Eirik heard it. So did the woman. Her gaze moved from the Jarl to Eirik, and something changed in her face. Not hope. Hope was too dangerous for that field. Recognition. Stenvar pointed his sword. "Complete the order, Wolfscar." Eirik lifted his shield and placed himself between the blade and the kneeling mother. "No child remembers nothing," he said, "and no army becomes clean by killing one." The first Viking arrow struck the center of his shield. The impact shoved him back half a step. Then the orcs roared. Eirik turned just in time to see black-fletched shafts rise from the far ridge. For one impossible moment, the sky between the armies filled with them. The mother threw herself over the baby. Eirik dropped above them both. Arrows hammered his shield, punched into the mud, and snapped against the broken stones. One cut through the fur at his shoulder. Another buried itself beside the mother's hand. Her own people were shooting at her. That was the first mystery. The second came when she looked through the rain of arrows toward Jarl Stenvar and shouted a name no orc prisoner should have known. "Haldren!" The Jarl froze, only for an instant, but Eirik saw it. Stenvar had not been called Haldren in 12 years, not since Gray Fjord, not since 6 peace envoys vanished and a war began before their bodies were cold. Eirik's stomach turned colder than iron. The mother seized his wrist. "If he takes me," she said in flawless Norse, "your people will never learn what he did." A spear struck the rim of Eirik's shield. He ripped his axe from the earth. The Viking front rank began advancing from one side. Orc runners poured down the slope from the other. Neither army moved to rescue the woman. Both moved to erase her. Eirik looked at the trenches behind them, half collapsed from the morning's assault. Smoke rolled through the narrow cuts. Men still groaned beneath shattered ladders. It was the only path not yet closed. He hooked one arm beneath the mother and hauled her upright. She snarled and tried to pull away. can hate me while running," he said. "I cannot run." He glanced down. Her left ankle bent at an angle no ankle should. The baby made one small sound against her chest. Eirik swore, lifted them both, and turned toward the trenches. Stenvar's voice followed him. "Eirik Wolfscar! Take one more step, and you are oathless." The words struck harder than the arrows. Oathless meant no clan, no protection, no burial beside his ancestors. It meant every Viking could kill him without blood debt, and any man who sheltered him would share his sentence. Across the field, an orc horn answered. 3 low blasts. The mother went rigid in Eirik's arms. "What does that mean?" he asked. Her eyes closed. "It means my brother has named me dead." Eirik looked back once. Viking shields were closing from the north. Orc spears were closing from the south. On one ridge stood the man who had owned Eirik's loyalty. On the other stood the warlord who had abandoned his own blood. Both commanders raised their weapons. Both pointed at the same 3 fugitives. Eirik carried the mother and child into the smoke as 2 armies charged after them. The trench swallowed them in darkness and ash. Eirik ran bent beneath the weight of the mother, his shield strapped across his back and his axe dragging sparks whenever its edge struck buried stone. The cut in his shoulder burned, but the greater pain came from the sound behind them. Viking boots struck the trench floor in a rhythm he knew as well as his own heartbeat. Orc hunters moved above, their feet lighter, their calls passing from ridge to ridge. He had fought beside one army for 20 years and against the other for nearly as long. Now both knew exactly how he would try to escape. "Left," the woman said. Eirik ignored her and took the right fork. A moment later, 3 Viking spears punched down through the smoke where the left passage opened. The woman twisted in his arms. "I said left because they would expect you to doubt me. You think highly of yourself for someone being carried. I think poorly of you for someone famous." Despite everything, a rough laugh escaped him. The baby startled at the sound, then began to cry. It was not loud. That made it worse. The child had the thin, exhausted cry of someone who had already learned that noise could bring death. The mother pressed her cheek to his head. "Korr, little ember, I am here." Eirik felt the words more than he understood them. The rhythm was familiar, too familiar. He stumbled. The trench vanished for a heartbeat. He saw a timber house burning at Gray Fjord, its roof collapsed, its doorway red with flame. He heard his wife Liv singing the same rise and fall to the child she had carried inside her. Not the same words, the same melody. An orc melody. He had never asked where she learned it. "Keep moving," the woman snapped. Eirik returned to the trench as a spear scraped his shield. He ducked beneath a fallen beam and shoved through a gap where the earth had caved inward. The passage ended at a wall of bodies. Viking and orc dead lay tangled together beneath a shattered siege ladder. Eirik lowered the mother carefully behind a broken shield and began pulling corpses aside. Her face hardened. "What are you doing? Finding the old drain? There is no drain. There was before your people filled it with stones. Our scouts mapped every ditch. Our diggers built this one before your scouts were born." He found the iron grate beneath a dead man's cloak. The bars were bent inward, clogged with mud and blood. Eirik wrapped both hands around them and pulled. Nothing moved. The boots behind them grew louder. The mother shifted Korr into the crook of one arm and reached beneath her torn leather coat. Eirik turned sharply, axe rising. She drew a narrow bone knife. He nearly struck her. Instead, she drove the blade into the packed dirt beside the grate and scraped away the stones wedged around its hinge. "Pull now," she said. Eirik pulled. The grate screamed open. An arrow passed through the space where his head had been and buried itself in the wall. Viking shapes appeared through the smoke. Eirik pushed the mother feet first into the drain. She bit down on a cry as her broken ankle struck the stone. Korr wailed. Eirik followed, seized the grate, and dragged it shut just as a spear thrust through. The blade cut across his palm. He caught the shaft, jerked the spearman into the bars, and could have driven the axe through his face. The old Eirik would have done it without thought. Instead, he broke the spear and crawled backward into the dark. The soldier outside stared after him as if mercy were more frightening than death. The drain was barely wide enough for Eirik's shoulders. Cold water ran beneath them. He pushed the mother ahead while shouts gathered behind the grate. "What is your name?" he asked. She did not answer. "If I am to die carrying you, I would like to know what to call you when I complain to the gods. Your gods will not receive me." "They may not receive me either." That earned silence. Then she said, "Ashka, and the boy is Korr. You heard me. I hear most things said near my beard." Her hand reached back in the darkness and touched the iron ring braided beneath his chin. The same ring Korr had touched before the armies fired. Ashka's fingers went still. "Where did you get this?" Eirik kept crawling. "A gift? From whom?" "Stenvar." The darkness behind Ashka seemed to deepen. "When?" Eirik already knew the answer would matter. After Gray Fjord, Ashka stopped moving. Eirik nearly crushed her against the stone. She turned as far as the narrow drain allowed, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. The fear was gone. So was the anger. Only grief remained. "That was not Stenvar's ring," she whispered. "It belonged to the man who went to Gray Fjord to end the war." Eirik stared at her outline in the dark. The drain had become so quiet that he could hear water slipping over stone between them. "What man?" he asked, though part of him already knew. "Torvald Raven's son, your Jarl's peace speaker." Eirik's hand rose to the ring in his beard. Stenvar had fastened it there himself after Gray Fjord. He had called it a warrior's reward. "A piece of iron taken from an Orc champion," he said. Proof that Eirik had held the western path while weaker men broke. Eirik had worn it for 12 years. He had worn it when Liv died. He had worn it while burning Orc farms in revenge. He had worn it through every battle that followed. Ashka began crawling again. "Move. You said it belonged to Torvald. And if the soldiers break through that grate, it will belong to Stenvar again." The words pushed him onward. The drain sloped downward for what felt like half a mile before ending behind a curtain of reeds.
And subscribe
Eirik
to
shoved
Orc
aside a
Chronicles
rotted
for
plank
more deep
and
fantasy
emerged
tales.
beneath the remains of an
The next
old
story
riverside
is waiting.
smokehouse. The roof had fallen in years ago. Fish hooks swung from black beams, and the river beyond ran brown around the pilings. He lifted Ashka through the opening and laid her on a patch of dry boards. Korr was shivering. Eirik tore the least bloody strip from his cloak and wrapped it around the child. Ashka watched his hands closely, ready to stab him if he moved too quickly. "You can put the knife down," he said. "You can put the axe down. I did that once today. It caused trouble." Her mouth almost moved toward a smile, but pain reached her first. Eirik examined her ankle. The joint was swollen, but the bone had not broken through the skin. "This will hurt. Everything hurts. This will be ambitious about it." He braced her heel against his thigh and pulled. Ashka bit into her sleeve. The ankle shifted with a dull click. Korr began crying again, and she gathered him close before her own cry could escape. Eirik found 2 strips of wood and bound the joint with leather from a dead harness hanging on the wall. His hands knew how to set bones. Berserkers who could not repair one another did not survive long enough to become legends. When he finished, Ashka took the bone knife and sliced the stitching inside her sleeve. A narrow object wrapped in oilskin slid into her palm. Eirik reached for his axe. She unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay half of a thick iron ring. It was not a finger ring. It was too wide, too heavy, and cut through the middle in a jagged line. One side bore the shape of a raven's wing. The other carried 3 small notches beneath an Orc tusk mark. Ashka pointed toward Eirik's beard. "Take yours off," he hesitated. For 12 years, no one had touched that braid except Liv. After her death, the ring had become less an ornament than a lock around a sealed room in his mind. Ashka waited. Eirik cut the braid. The iron half dropped into his hand. Even before he placed it beside hers, he saw the truth. The broken edges matched. The raven on his piece joined the tusk on hers, forming a circle around a small boat carved between them. When he pressed the halves together, a line of tiny runes appeared on the inner surface. The marks had been divided so neither piece could be read alone. Eirik leaned toward the light leaking through the roof. "Read it?" Ashka said. He knew the old northern runes. Every oath warrior did. "Peace at Gray Fjord," he read slowly. "Witnessed under blood and iron by Haldren Varson and Gorak of the Red Tusk. Let no blade cross the river after this joining." The ring nearly slipped from his fingers. Haldren Varson was Stenvar's birth name. Gorak of the Red Tusk was Ashka's brother, commander of the Orc army across the field. Both men had spent 12 years claiming the peace meeting never happened. Both had said the envoys were killed before terms were spoken. Both had built their power on the slaughter that followed. "My husband carried that half," Ashka said. Rukhan was Gorak's chosen speaker. Torvald carried the other. They joined the ring before witnesses from both peoples. Then the witnesses became murderers. Eirik looked at the iron in his palm. A ring proves a meeting. It does not prove who killed them. You prove who killed them. His head rose. Ashka held his gaze. "You were at Gray Fjord. I guarded the western path. You guarded the road the killers used." Eric's throat tightened. Memory came in pieces. A line of 6 riders entering the pines beneath white cloth. Stenvar wearing a plain grey coat instead of a Jarl's colours. An orc commander with red tusks waiting near the water. Torvald laughing because Rukhan had poured fermented goat milk into a Viking cup. Eirik standing at the western path with 12 warriors, ordered to let no one pass. Then screams from the fjord. One of Eirik's men asking whether they should go. Stenvar's messenger arriving breathless. "Hold the path. No one leaves." Eirik had obeyed. Later, Stenvar returned alone with blood on his sleeve and the broken ring in his fist. "Tell me what you saw," Ashka said. Eirik closed his hand around the joined pieces. "I saw nothing." Her face turned hard. "That is the answer of a coward. Yes." The word surprised both of them. Eirik had been called butcher, beast, oathhound, king-killer, wall-breaker. No one had ever called him coward to his face. No one had needed to. He had carried the word privately for 12 years. "I heard them die," he said. "I was ordered to hold the path. I knew the order was wrong. I held it anyway." Ashka's hand tightened around Korr. "Did you see Stenvar return?" "Yes." "With Torvald's ring?" "Yes." "And blood?" "Yes." "Then you saw enough." Eirik looked away. Ashka's voice broke for the first time. Rukhan came home in pieces. They tied his body to a horse and sent it into our camp. Gorak told us Vikings had cut him apart during false negotiations. He held my shoulders while I screamed. He swore he would drown the north in blood for my husband. She looked at the ring. All that time, his name was inside the oath. A board creaked outside. Eirik's axe was in his hand before the sound finished. Ashka wrapped the ring halves and pushed them back beneath her sleeve. Another creak came from the riverside. Not boots. Too light. Eirik moved toward the broken doorway. He caught a glimpse of grey feathers between the reeds. A raven stood on one piling, a narrow strip of white cloth tied around its leg. The bird watched him. Then it flew. Eirik lunged, but the raven was already above the river. Ashka dragged herself to the doorway. "Scout bird?" "Stenvar uses hawks. Orcs use crows. My brother uses ravens taken from northern nests." The bird climbed, turned once, and vanished toward the eastern ridge. Eirik looked downstream. The river bent around a stand of alder trees. Beyond them lay Raven Ford, the only crossing shallow enough for a wounded woman. Upstream, black smoke rose over the battlefield. "We have minutes," he said. Ashka shifted Korr against her chest. "Then leave us." Eirik thought he had misheard. She pushed the oilskin bundle toward him. "Take the ring. Reach your people. Speak. My people just fired arrows at me. Some of them will listen. Will yours?" Her silence answered. Eirik crouched before her. "If I take the proof and leave you, Stenvar says I stole it from a corpse. Gorak says you were forced. Both call me mad from battle fever. They may say that anyway. They will. Then why stay?" Eirik looked at Korr. The child had one small fist wrapped in the torn edge of his cloak. because proof needs a living voice. Ashka studied him as if searching for the trap in the sentence. "Your voice?" she asked. "Yours first, mine after. You think they will let an orc woman speak? No. Then what are you offering?" Eirik stood and slid the axe through the loop at his belt. "A chance to make them hear you anyway." From the riverbank came the low whistle of an orc hunter. A second whistle answered from the trees. Then a Viking horn sounded upstream. The two hunting parties were closing on the smokehouse from opposite directions. Eirik lifted Ashka again. This time she did not fight him. He stepped through the broken wall and into the river. The water rose to his thighs, then his waist. The current pulled hard at his legs. He held Ashka high enough to keep Korr dry and moved beneath the shadow of the smokehouse pilings. A Viking voice called from the bank. "Wolfscar! By order of Jarl Stenvar, lay down the woman and your death will be clean!" An orc voice answered from the other side. "Ashka! Give us the human and the child may be returned to the clan!" Ashka's whole body tightened. Eirik felt it. "They are lying," he whispered. "I know." The admission cost her more than the broken ankle. Eirik took another step. The riverbed disappeared beneath his foot. The current seized all three of them and dragged them under. Cold water closed over Eric's head. Ashka tore free from his grip. For one terrible instant he saw Korr's small face beneath the brown surface, eyes open, mouth forming a silent cry. Eirik kicked downward and found nothing. The river rolled him against a submerged log. Pain burst through his ribs. His axe caught between two branches and twisted his belt so hard he nearly lost his breath. He cut the leather loop, let the weapon go, and reached through the current. His hand found cloth. He pulled. Ashka surfaced first, coughing, one arm still locked around Korr. The child did not move. "Give him to me," Eirik said. She struck his hand away. "He is not breathing." The words changed her. Ashka stopped being a hunted witness, a wounded orc, a sister betrayed by a war chief. She became only a mother. She shoved Korr against Eirik's chest. He hooked one arm over the floating log and laid the child along his forearm. Korr's head fell back. Water ran from his nose. Eirik had seen healers revive drowned men. He had watched them press a chest, clear a throat, breathe life into blue lips. He had never done it himself. He put 2 fingers beneath the baby's chin and breathed gently into his mouth. Nothing. Ashka made a sound Eirik would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. He pressed Korr's chest with 2 fingers. Once. Twice. Again. Behind them, arrows struck the river. Eirik turned his back to the bank and covered Korr with his body. "Breathe!" he growled. The baby remained still. Eirik breathed into him again. Korr coughed. It was a weak sound, followed by a thin cry, but it seemed louder than both armies. Ashka seized him and held him against her neck. Her eyes closed. Tears mixed with river water on her face. Eirik looked away, not from shame, but because the moment belonged to them. The current carried the log around the bend. Reeds rose on both sides, hiding them from the hunters. Eirik kicked toward the western bank until his boots struck gravel. He dragged Ashka and Korr into the shallows. His axe was gone. For the first time since he was 15, Eirik Wolfscar stood unarmed while enemies searched for him. Ashka noticed. "You left it." I noticed. A berserker without an axe. A mother with a broken ankle. "We are impressive fugitives," Korr sneezed. Eirik laughed once, breathless and almost angry with relief. Ashka stared at him, then laughed too. The sound lasted only a heartbeat, yet it changed something between them. Not trust. Trust was a bridge built plank by plank. This was only the first stone on the riverbed. They climbed through the reeds and found an abandoned cart track leading toward a low hill. Eirik knew the country. Beyond the hill stood an old grain mill, one of the last northern farms before the disputed valley. The woman who owned it had supplied flour to Stenvar's army years ago, before the war swallowed both her sons. "Hessa may hide us," he said. "Why?" "She hates Stenvar." "Does she hate orcs more?" Eirik did not answer. They reached the mill near dusk. Its wheel no longer turned, though water still rushed beneath it. A single thread of smoke rose from the chimney. Eirik set Ashka beneath an apple tree and approached the door alone. It opened before he knocked. Hessa was small, grey-haired, and held a wood axe with both hands. She looked at Eric's cut beard, empty weapon loop, and blood-soaked clothing. "I heard the horns," she said. "Then you know I have little time. I know you are oathless." The word no longer struck him as hard, perhaps because he had already lost the thing it threatened. "There is a woman and child by your tree. I saw them. Her ankle is broken. The child nearly drowned." Hessa's eyes moved beyond him. Ashka sat upright despite the pain, holding Korr where the old woman could see him. Hessa's jaw tightened. "My younger son died at Red Hollow," she said. "Orcs opened him from hip to throat." Ashka answered in Norse. "My husband died at Gray Fjord. Vikings returned him in pieces." Hessa looked from one to the other. "So both of you have brought me your dead and expect me to choose which grief matters?" "No," Eirik said. "We ask you to choose the living." The old woman held his gaze for a long time. Then she stepped aside. "Barn, not the house. If soldiers search, I never saw you." The barn smelled of hay, old grain, and sheep. To Eirik, it smelled better than any feast hall. Hessa brought dry cloth, goat milk, bread, and a clay jar of salve. She did not speak while Ashka changed Korr's wet wrappings. She only watched the child drink. When Korr finished, Hessa reached out one finger. He grabbed it. Something in the old woman's face collapsed. "My eldest had hands like that," she whispered. Ashka said nothing. She did not need to. Hessa straightened and became hard again. "Men came before you." Eirik looked toward the door. "Whose?" "Both. That is not possible." "It happened anyway. 3 Vikings at noon, 2 Orcs after sunset yesterday." Ashka shifted. "Yesterday? Before the battle?" Hessa nodded. "They showed me drawings, asked whether I had seen a broken iron ring, one half marked with a bird, one with a tusk." Eirik and Ashka exchanged a look. The leaders had not begun hunting the proof after Eirik's refusal. They had expected Ashka to cross the battlefield. They had prepared to erase her before she ever reached the Viking line. "Did the men see each other?" Eirik asked. "No, but they asked the same question in the same words." Hessa went to a shelf and returned with a scrap of parchment. One Viking dropped this near the door. It was a list of farms, crossings, and shrines along the river. Beside each place was a small mark. Some were in northern runes. Others used Orc tally cuts. At the bottom, 2 words had been written in both languages. "No witness." Ashka touched the parchment. "My brother's clerk makes the lower marks." Eirik recognized the upper hand. Stenvar's own law speaker had written it. The cooperation was not rumor now. It was ink. Hessa studied them. "What have you carried into my barn?" "The reason your sons died," Ashka said. The old woman went still. Eirik told her about the ring. Not everything. He did not yet speak of his own place at Gray Fjord. But he showed her the joined iron and read the oath. Hessa listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat on an overturned bucket. "My boys joined because Stenvar said the Orcs murdered peace speakers," she said. "He stood in the market and swore no agreement had ever been made." "He lied," Eirik said. "You stood behind him that day," Eirik remembered. "He had worn a new ring in his beard." "Yes, and said nothing." "Yes." Hessa's hand struck his face. The slap was not strong enough to turn his head, but he let it. Ashka watched. Hessa's eyes filled with tears she refused to release. "You carried his lie into every village. Men saw Wolfscar beside him and believed. I know. No, you are beginning to know." She walked out of the barn. Eirik remained where he was. Ashka adjusted the blanket around Korr. "You could have stopped her hand. She earned the blow." "Many people will believe they have. I know." "No," Ashka said quietly. "You are beginning to know." He almost resented her for using Hessa's words. Then Korr reached toward the empty place where Eirik's beard ring had hung. Eirik gave him a finger instead. The child held on. Outside, Hessa's geese began to hiss. Eirik rose. A horse approached along the cart track. Only one. Hessa returned through the barn door carrying a long-handled splitting maul. "Seller," she said. "Now," Eirik helped Ashka beneath a trapdoor under the grain bins. The space below was narrow and smelled of earth. Hessa handed him an old hunting spear before closing them in. "It belonged to my husband," she said. "Do not make me regret lending it." Through cracks in the floorboards, Eirik watched a rider dismount. The man wore Viking mail and Stenvar's white wolf badge. He carried no helmet, only a leather message tube tied across his chest. Hessa met him in the yard. "I have no sons left for your war," she said. "I did not come for sons." The rider unrolled a parchment and read loudly enough for neighbouring farms to hear. "By decree of Jarl Stenvar, Eirik Wolfscar is named oathless for treason in battle. Any person who shelters him, aids him, or withholds knowledge of his path forfeits land and life. The orc female called Ashka and the male child she carries are enemy agents and must be killed without hearing or burial." Ashka's breath stopped beside Eirik. The rider turned the parchment. A second message had been written beneath the first in orc script. He read that too, stumbling over the words. "By decree of War Chief Gorak, Ashka blood sister is severed from the red tusk. Her child is named Corrupted. Eirik Wolfscar is a thief of clan blood. All three are to die without challenge, ransom, or witness. Matching orders, matching sentences, without hearing, without witness." The rider rolled the parchment. "Have you seen them?" Hessa looked toward the barn. Eirik tightened his grip on the spear. The old woman's face showed nothing. "No," she said. The rider studied her. Then he walked toward the barn. The messenger stopped outside the barn door. Hessa stepped in front of him. "My roof is failing," she said. "If you enter and it falls, Stenvar can explain to your mother why a traitor's dust killed you." The man smiled without warmth. "Move." He pushed her aside. Eirik lifted the trapdoor before the messenger crossed the threshold. The old hunting spear struck the man's sword hand and pinned his sleeve to the doorframe. Before he could shout, Eirik covered his mouth and pulled him inside. The messenger kicked, reached for a knife, and found Ashka's bone blade at his throat. Hessa closed the barn door. "Did you have to do that where the geese could see?" she asked. Eirik twisted the messenger's wrist until the knife dropped. "The geese already dislike me. They have judgment." The messenger stared at Ashka. Hatred came first, then fear. "She bewitched you," he said through Eric's hand. Eirik released his mouth. "You have watched me drink fermented seal fat. Do I look easy to bewitch? You betrayed us for an orc. I refused to murder a mother. You refused the Jarl." The order of those accusations told Eirik everything. He pulled the message tube from the man's chest and opened it. Inside were 3 parchments. One was the public decree already read. The second contained instructions for search parties. The third was sealed with black wax. Eirik broke it. The messenger lunged. Ashka pressed the knife harder beneath his jaw. "Be still," she said. "My hand is tired." The sealed order named Raven Ford. Svala Ironhand was to take 6 warriors, close the crossing, and capture Eirik alive only if the ring could not be found. Ashka and Korr were to be killed immediately. At the bottom, in Stenvar's own hand, was one more line. If Ironhand sees the joined oath, she becomes a witness. Do not return with witnesses. Eirik read it twice. Svala had shared his shield line since they were 17. She had dragged him from beneath a dead horse at Black Marsh. He had carried her 3 miles after an orc spear broke her hip. When Liv died, Svala sat outside his house for 7 nights without speaking because she knew words would only make the grief smaller than it was. Stenvar meant to kill her for seeing a piece of iron. The messenger saw Eirik's expression and looked away. "You knew," Eirik said. "I carry orders. That is what I told myself at Gray Fjord." The man swallowed. Eirik turned him around and bound his hands with harness leather. "How far ahead is Svala? I will not answer." Ashka leaned close. Your Jarl has already written your death if you learn too much. Loyalty will not protect you from a man who fears memory. The messenger's eyes flicked toward the broken wax. He said the ring was Orc trickery, he muttered. Then why kill Vikings who see it? Eirik asked. No answer came. Hessa took the public decree from the floor and held it near the lantern. My sons died believing this man. I will not lose my farm because you brought his lies here. Eirik thought she was about to burn the parchment. Instead, she folded it and placed it inside her dress. What are you doing? Keeping a copy of the day, Stenvar ordered a baby killed without hearing. The messenger lowered his head. Hessa pointed toward him. Put him in the cellar. I will release him after sunrise. He will tell them you helped us. He will tell them you threatened me. The messenger looked up. That is a lie. Hessa gave him a flat stare. You serve a man who murdered peace envoys. Today is not the day to become delicate about lies. Eirik almost smiled. They left before darkness fully settled. Hessa gave Ashka a wool coat large enough to hide her shape and wrapped Korr in a flour sack lined with lamb fleece. She found Eirik an old woodcutter's axe, blunt at the edge but balanced well enough. At the gate, she caught his wrist. My sons were called Leaf and Orm, she said. When you speak, if anyone listens, say their names too. Say what the lie cost. I will. Do not promise lightly. I have done that enough. Hessa released him. They travelled south through orchards stripped by soldiers. Eirik carried Ashka whenever the ground grew rough. At first she objected each time. By midnight, pain had exhausted her pride, and she rested one arm around his neck without speaking. Korr slept against her. You saved him, she said after a long silence. Eirik watched the tree line. He coughed. I encouraged him. You gave him breath. Do not make it holy. Why? Holy things demand monuments. It was only what someone had to do. Ashka studied his face in the moonlight. That is how mercy survives. People call it ordinary until enough of them do it. Eirik did not answer. He had spent years believing mercy was the choice made by those too weak to finish a fight. Yet every act of mercy that day had cost more than killing ever had. Lowering the axe had cost his weapon. Saving Korr had cost his weapon. Sparing the messenger might cost Hessa her life. Mercy was not softness. It was a blade turned toward the hand that held it. Near dawn, they reached Raven Ford. The river widened there over pale stones, shallow enough for carts in summer. On the far side stood a ruined watchtower. No fire burned inside it. No birds moved in the trees. Eirik stopped. What? Ashka whispered. Svala is here. You see her? No. Then how do you know? Because I do not. He lowered Ashka behind a boulder and handed her the woodcutter's axe. She looked offended. I have a knife. That axe is not for fighting. If I do not return, cut the willow branches, tie them into a litter, and follow the river west. Where will I go? Anywhere soldiers are not. That place does not exist. Then invent it. Eirik stepped into the ford with empty hands raised. Svala, he called. An arrow struck the water between his boots. Her voice came from the tower. One more step, and the next enters your knee. You always aim too low. I know how tall your pride stands. She emerged on the broken wall wearing dark mail and a round shield painted with an iron hand. Her blonde hair had been cut short since he last saw her. A scar crossed the bridge of her nose, new and pale. 5 Viking warriors rose from hiding along the banks. Eirik counted them. The order had said 6. Where is the last man? He asked. Behind the woman, Ashka cried out. Eirik turned. A warrior had come through the reeds and pressed a sword against her back. He held Korr by the wrappings with his other hand. The baby began to scream. Something hot and ancient opened inside Eirik. The berserker rage did not arrive as madness. That was another story men told because the truth frightened them more. The rage came with perfect clarity. He saw the distance to every throat. He knew which stones would roll beneath each boot. He knew how quickly he could cross the ford, break the first man's neck, take his sword, cut down the second, and reached the warrior holding Korr before the child struck the ground. 6 breaths, perhaps 5. Svala saw the change in him. "Eirik!" she warned. He closed his eyes. The rage
Enjoying
remained.
the story?
He did not let it
Leave
choose.
a like
When he
and
opened
subscribe
them,
to
he
Orc
lowered
Chronicles
himself to his knees
for more
in the
deep
water.
fantasy tales.
Every Viking stared.
The next story is
Eirik
waiting.
Wolfscar had knelt to no living enemy. "Put the child in his mother's arms," he said. "Drop your knife first," the warrior shouted at Ashka. She obeyed. He returned Korr, though the sword stayed against her shoulder. Svala descended from the tower. "Where is the ring?" Eirik looked at her. "You know about it. I know Stenvar says you killed 3 scouts and stole an orc charm. I killed no one. The battlefield saw you raise your axe against our line. I raised a shield. You ran with an enemy. I carried a mother. You broke your oath. I discovered what it was built on." Svala stopped an arm's length away. The scar on her nose tightened when she frowned. "Show me." Eirik glanced toward the warrior behind Ashka. "Let her come here." "No, then you will not see it." Svala's hand moved to her sword. Eirik remained kneeling. For a long moment, old trust fought new command in her face. At last, she signaled. Ashka limped into the ford with Korr held close. The warrior followed, sword ready. She took the oilskin from her sleeve and placed one half of the ring in Svala's palm. Eirik gave her the other. Svala joined them. Her lips moved as she read the inner runes. Eirik watched the exact instant she reached Haldren's name. She looked up. "Stenvar told us the meeting failed before he arrived." "He was there," Ashka said. "So was my brother." Svala looked at Eirik. "And you?" "I held the western path." Her face drained of color. "You told me you fought raiders there. Stenvar told me to say it, and you obeyed." "Yes." She stepped back as if he had struck her. "My brother died in the first winter raid after Gray Fjord." "I know. You stood beside me at his pyre." "I know. You let me curse the orcs. I know." Svala hit him. Her fist split his lip. He stayed on his knees. She hit him again. "You knew?" "I knew something was wrong. I did not know the whole truth." "You knew enough to lie." "Yes." Svala's hand rose a 3rd time, then stopped. A horn sounded north of the ford. One rider came down the road at speed, carrying Stenvar's white wolf banner. Svala wiped blood from her knuckles and turned. The messenger reined in at the bank. "Iron Hand! New order from the Jarl!" He threw her a sealed strip of leather. Svala broke the wax. Her eyes moved across the words. Then they moved toward her 5 warriors. "Read it aloud," Eirik said. "This is a command matter. Read it." Svala's jaw worked. The youngest warrior, a red-haired man named Nils, took one step closer. "What does it say?" Svala folded the order. The mounted messenger drew his sword. "It says Iron Hand has seen the joined oath," he said. "It says none of you are to return." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the messenger charged Svala. Eirik rose from the river like a breaking gate. He caught the horse's bridle, twisted, and pulled its head sideways. The animal stumbled. The messenger swung down at him. Eirik took the cut across his forearm, seized the man's belt, and dragged him from the saddle. They struck the stones together. Erik's hand closed around the messenger's throat. One squeeze would end it. The man clawed at his wrist. Eirik saw Gray Fjord. He saw himself holding the path because an order had made cowardice feel like duty. He released the throat. The messenger gasped. Svala placed her sword point beneath his chin. "Who was ordered to kill us?" she asked. The man coughed. "The rear archers. If I failed." A bowstring snapped from the trees. Nils fell with an arrow through his neck. The ford exploded into motion. A second arrow struck the stones where Svala had been standing. She threw herself behind her shield and dragged Nils with her, though one glance told her he was already gone. The other Vikings scattered for cover. Ashka dropped beside a boulder and covered Korr with her body. Eirik seized the fallen messenger's sword. 3 archers appeared among the alders on the northern bank. They wore no badges, but Eirik knew the way they moved. Stenvar's household hunters, men trained to kill witnesses before questions could be asked. One aimed at Ashka. Eirik stepped into the arrow's path and turned the sword flat. The shaft glanced away. The next came for Svala. She raised her shield too late. Eirik caught the arrow with the shield torn from Nils's arm. Svala stared at him over the rim. "You should hate me," he said. "I can hate you after we live." That was the Svala he remembered. The hunters advanced from the trees. Eirik could have rushed them. The rage inside him offered the route again, clean and simple. 3 men, 3 deaths, less than 10 heartbeats. Instead, he slammed sword against shield and shouted, "Stenvar ordered your deaths too. Ask why he sent you without colours." One archer hesitated. The leader shot at Eirik's face. Eirik ducked. "That one may be difficult to persuade." Svala snorted despite herself. She signalled her warriors to spread. 2 crossed downstream under cover of the rocks. Ashka saw the movement and began shouting in Orcish toward the eastern ridge. Eirik did not understand the words, but the response came quickly. Black-fletched arrows flew from the far bank. For one hopeful instant, he thought Orc scouts were attacking Stenvar's hunters. Then a shaft struck one of Svala's men in the back. Both sides still wanted every witness dead. Svala looked toward Ashka. "What did you shout? That my brother's enemies had found me? And?" They answered that my brother has no enemies among the living. Eirik understood the meaning. Gorak's scouts had been ordered to kill their own sister before anyone could hear her. The ford became a narrow world of stone, water, and arrows. Vikings shot from the north. Orcs shot from the east. Eirik, Ashka, Svala, and 3 surviving warriors were trapped in the middle. Eirik looked at the ruined watchtower. Its lower wall had collapsed toward the river, leaving a sloped pile of stone beneath the old doorway. "Tower!" he shouted. They moved together. Svala went first, shield raised. Eirik followed, carrying Ashka. Her broken ankle struck his thigh with every step. She made no sound. One Viking covered the rear while the others dragged Nils's body until arrows forced them to leave him in the water. Svala saw it happen. Her face became stone. Inside the tower, they found a spiral stair leading to a roofless upper chamber. The old floor had rotted through in places, but the walls gave cover. The mounted messenger tried to crawl away. Svala caught him by the ankle. "You carried an order to murder my people," she said. "I carried the Jarl's law." "No, you carried his fear." She bound him beside the wall. Below, the 2 hunting parties shouted to one another across the river. At first, the words were threats. Then the voices lowered. Eirik crept to an arrow slit and saw a Viking step from the trees holding a white strip of cloth. An Orc scout met him in the shallows. They spoke, not as enemies, as men arranging work. "They are deciding who enters first," Ashka said. Svala looked at the joined ring in her hand. "Stenvar and Gorak have been trading messages." "For years," Ashka said. "Why continue the war if they can speak?" "Because speaking ends wars. Enemies preserve thrones. The truth settled heavily over the room. Stenvar needed Orc raids to keep northern clans under one banner. Gorak needed Viking attacks to silence rival clan elders. Each man pointed across the river and said only he could protect his people. Each funeral made the next order easier to obey. Eirik thought of all the villages burned in revenge for other villages. Every corpse had become an argument for another corpse. Svala looked at him. "How many new? At Gray Fjord? Perhaps 10. How many live? Stenvar, Gorak, me, and Ashka." She learned from Rukan. Ashka shook her head. "There is another." They turned toward her. My brother's mother, Morga, witnessed the oath. She marked the ring with the 3 cuts beneath the tusk. Gorak told the clan she died of fever 2 winters ago. "But?" Eirik asked. "I heard servants whisper that she lives in the old redoubt above his camp. He calls it protection. It is a prison." Svala leaned against the wall. "A living witness from his own blood? And one from Stenvar's," Ashka said, looking at Eirik. He did not like the weight of that sentence. Below, shields began striking the tower door. The stone frame shook. Svala studied the chamber. No second stair, no rope, Eirik looked up. Only open sky stood above them. Part of the western wall had fallen away, exposing the river bend and a steep slope covered in pine. The drop was nearly 30 feet. Ashka followed his gaze. No! The pine branches will slow us. They may also place us directly into the afterlife. The door will place us there more reliably. Eirik tore the remaining straps from 2 shields and tied them together. He looped one end around Ashka and Korr, then handed the other to Svala. You lower them first. Who lowers you? Svala asked. I fall with dignity. You have never done anything with dignity. The door cracked below. They lowered Ashka over the broken wall. She gripped the rope with one hand and Korr with the other. Pine branches caught her halfway down. Svala and a warrior braced until Ashka reached the slope. The surviving Vikings followed. The tower door burst inward. Eirik saw helmets below. He tied the bound messenger to a roof beam where the attackers would find him. Tell Stenvar I spared you twice, he said. Make him wonder why. Then he and Svala leaped together. The pine caught them badly. Eirik struck 3 branches, lost the sword, and landed on his back hard enough to empty his lungs. Svala crashed beside him with half the tree following. For several breaths, neither moved. Then Svala said, Dignity. Eirik coughed. A great deal of it. They fled west before the attackers reached the broken wall. By the next evening, only Svala remained with Eirik and Ashka. One warrior had a shattered wrist and turned north to warn his family. Another stayed behind at a crossroads to spread copies of the kill order. The last carried Nils's name and the truth toward Hesse's farms. The group had become smaller, but the story was moving ahead of them. That frightened Stenvar more than any army. They sheltered beneath an overhanging cliff while rain finally came, washing blood from the leaves. Ashka fed Korr and slept with her back against the stone. Svala sat across from Eirik, sharpening a knife. You lied to me for 12 years, she said. Yes, I have not forgiven you. I did not ask. You should. Eirik looked at the sleeping mother and child. Forgiveness asked too early is another demand. Svala stopped sharpening. Liv used to say that. I know. She also used to say you mistook silence for strength. I know that too. Svala's gaze softened, then hardened again. Did she know about Gray Fjord? No. Would you have told her? Eirik thought of Liv's hands, always warm from the bread ovens. He thought of the orc lullaby she somehow knew. He thought of the child she had carried when raiders burned their house. I told myself I would, he said. After the next battle. After Stenvar no longer needed me. After I found the right words. Cowards are rich in tomorrows. Svala put the knife away. Ashka opened her eyes. She had not been asleep. My husband wrote one last message, she said. It arrived after his body. He said he had met a northern woman near Gray Fjord who knew our mourning songs. She brought food to the peace camp and asked him to teach her a cradle melody. Eirik's breath stopped. What woman? He called her Liv of the Flower Hands. The cliff, the rain, the war itself seemed to disappear. Liv had known. Not the murder, not Stenvar's betrayal, but she had known peace was being attempted. She had carried bread to the envoys. She had learned Korr's lullaby from Ashka's husband. When Eirik returned from Gray Fjord and repeated Stenvar's lie, Liv must have understood that something was wrong. Yet she had said nothing. Why did she not confront me? He asked. Ashka's answer was gentle. Perhaps she was waiting for you to become the man who could hear it. Eirik bowed his head. He had believed his mercy on the battlefield began when the axe stopped. It had begun years earlier, with a dead woman teaching him a song he refused to recognize. At dawn, Ashka made her decision. We go to Gorak's camp. Svala stared at her. Your brother ordered you killed. He also imprisoned the last living witness. You cannot walk into an orc army. I can demand the mother's hearing. Eirik looked at her. What is that? An old clan rite. A mother carrying a child may speak before the clan stones before blood judgment is passed. Gorak can deny me privately. He cannot deny me before the elders without exposing fear. He may kill you before you reach the stones. Yes. Then this is a poor plan. It is the first plan that moves toward truth instead of away from death. Svala muttered. I am beginning to dislike how often she is right. They reached the edge of the Orc encampment at midday. Thousands of hide tents covered the valley beneath red banners. Smoke rose from cook fires. War drums beat from the central ridge. Ashka removed Hessa's coat. She braided her hair in the red tusk pattern and painted 3 lines of river mud across her face. Then she placed Korr in Eirik's arms. He stiffened. What are you doing? If I carry him, Gorak's archers may claim they could not shoot without risking the child. That did not trouble them before. It may trouble the soldiers watching. She began limping down the hill alone. Eirik caught her shoulder. You are not going alone. The right belongs to an Orc mother. The arrows do not care. Svala stepped beside him and raised Nils's shield. Then we make them care. They entered the camp together. An Orc mother with a splintered ankle, a Viking berserker carrying her baby, and a shield maiden wearing the badge of the enemy. The first Orc guard lifted his spear. Ashka spoke in a voice that carried across the valley. I am Ashka, daughter of Morga, blood sister of Gorak. I demand the mother's hearing. Every drum stopped. Silence spread outward from the gate. Orc cooks left pots hanging over flames. Armorers stopped hammering. Wounded soldiers pushed themselves upright on their cots. Even the children carrying water stood still and stared at the impossible sight of Eirik Wolfscar holding an Orc infant against his chest. The guard lowered his spear by an inch. Another guard hissed, She is severed. Ashka did not look at him. A severed mother still carries blood. The stones hear before chiefs judge. Old words carried old power. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. That uncertainty was enough. Ashka kept walking. The clan stones stood in a circle at the center of camp, black pillars carved with generations of names. Gorak waited before them in red-scale armor. He was larger than Ashka, broader even than Eirik, with one tusk capped in bronze and the other stained dark at the tip. Warriors crowded behind him. He did not look surprised to see his sister alive. He looked inconvenienced. Ashka, he said.
Enjoying
you were given
the story?
A clean death on the field.
Leave a like.
You chose
and
shame
subscribe
instead.
to Orc Chronicles.
You gave
for
archers
more deep
permission to
fantasy
shoot through your
tales.
nephew.
The next story
Gorak's
is
eyes
waiting.
moved to Korr. For a fraction of a moment, something human passed through his face. Love, perhaps, or memory. Then it vanished. The child was already stolen by the Viking. Eirik held Korr higher so everyone could see the boy sleeping against his chest, Ashka said. The Viking pulled him from the river and gave him breath. A murmur moved through the crowd. Gorak's gaze sharpened. The berserker who burned our farms? The same? The butcher of Red Hollow? The same? And you stand beside him? Ashka stepped inside the circle of stones. I stand beside the man who refused your order and his own commander's order when both demanded a baby's death. The murmur grew louder. Gorak raised one hand. You bring enemy lies into sacred ground. I bring your name. Ashka drew the half ring from her sleeve. Eirik removed the other from his pouch. When the pieces joined, several elders leaned forward. Gorak did not. That told the crowd more than surprise would have. Ashka read the inner oath in Orcish. When she spoke Gorak's name, an old warrior near the stones covered his mouth. Gorak laughed. It was too loud. A forged trinket. Then let Morga say so. The name struck the camp like a thrown spear. Gorak's bronze-capped tusk showed between his lips. Our mother is dead. No, Ashka said. She is imprisoned in the redoubt above this valley because she witnessed the oath. An elder turned toward the ridge. Gorak saw it. His hand dropped to his sword. Svala moved closer to Eirik. This is the moment, she whispered. What moment? When a liar runs out of words. Gorak pointed at Ashka. She has been broken by humans. Take her. No one moved. The old rites still held them. Ashka spread her empty hands. The mother's hearing is not finished. It is finished when the war chief says it is. Then you admit the stones mean nothing." That was the wrong thing for a ruler to hear in front of warriors who believed their customs were older than his command. Gorak crossed the circle in 3 strides and struck Ashka across the face. Eirik moved. Svala caught his arm. Not yet. Ashka fell to one knee, blood bright on her lip. She looked up at her brother. "You held me when Rukhan died," she said. "You let me curse an enemy you had already joined." Gorak's face twisted. He seized her hair. Korr woke and began crying. The sound reached Gorak. He turned toward the child. "Bring me my sister's son." Eirik's arms tightened. 4 guards approached. "You will not take him," Eirik said. Gorak smiled. "You stand in an orc camp, oathless and surrounded. That child is clan blood. He is not a banner. He is not yours." "No," Eirik said. "He is hers." Ashka met his eyes from the stones. Then she nodded once. Trust had finally crossed the bridge. The guards came closer. Eirik handed Korr to Svala. He stepped forward, empty-handed. Every warrior in the circle knew his name. They had heard stories of him tearing gates from hinges, fighting through spear walls, laughing with arrows in his flesh. They expected the beast. Eirik gave them restraint. The first guard thrust a spear. Eirik turned sideways, caught the shaft, and pulled the man off balance. He broke the spear across his knee and tossed both halves away. The second swung a hooked blade. Eirik trapped the wrist, twisted until the weapon fell, then shoved the guard backward without breaking the arm. The third hesitated. Eirik pointed at him. Good instinct. The fourth attacked from behind. Svala struck him with the rim of her shield. The crowd surged. Gorak drew his sword and dragged Ashka against him, blade at her throat. "Enough!" Eirik stopped. Svala stopped. Korr screamed in her arms. Gorak backed toward the ridge path. "The mother is judged. The child belongs to the clan. The humans die at sunset." An elder shouted, "The hearing was not completed." Gorak slashed the old warrior across the chest. The elder fell. This time the crowd did not murmur. It recoiled. Gorak had spilled elder blood inside the stones. He knew it too. Panic entered his eyes, hidden beneath rage. "Seize them all!" he shouted. His personal guard obeyed. Ordinary soldiers did not. That difference saved Eirik's life. He drove into the red-armored guards, not to kill, but to open a path. Svala followed with Korr, strapped against her chest beneath her shield. Ashka bit Gorak's wrist. He cursed and released her. She dropped, rolled, and crawled between the stones. Eirik reached her first. He lifted her and ran toward the ridge. "Why upward?" Svala shouted. "Morga," Ashka answered. The redoubt stood above the camp behind a wall of sharpened logs. Gorak's guards pursued while confused soldiers filled the paths below. Some shouted for Ashka's death. Others demanded the hearing continue. The camp was no longer one army. It was a question splitting into thousands of minds. Eirik rammed the redoubt gate with his shoulder. It held. He hit it again. A crossbar cracked. On the third strike, the gate burst inward. 2 guards waited beyond it. One raised an axe. The other looked past Eirik at Ashka and lowered his weapon. "My mother?" Ashka asked. The guard pointed toward a stone hut. The axe-wielder turned on him. Svala's shield ended the argument. Inside the hut, they found Morga chained to a wooden chair. She was old, thin, and nearly blind. 3 ritual scars marked each cheek. When Ashka spoke her name, the old woman lifted her head. "My daughter?" Ashka collapsed beside her. For a moment, war ceased to exist. Morga touched Ashka's face, then Korr's. Her fingers shook over the child's ears and brow. "Rukhan's eyes!" she whispered. Ashka pressed her forehead to her mother's hands. Eirik broke the chain with a guard's hammer. Morga looked toward the sound. "Who is the giant? Eirik Wolfscar!" Ashka said. The old woman spat at his boots. Svala gave a tired laugh. "She sees clearly enough." Eirik wiped his boot on the floor. "Fair!" Morga's face turned toward him. You guarded the West Road. Yes, you heard them. Yes, and lived silent. Yes, why speak now? Eirik looked at Korr. Because I finally understood that silence also has descendants. Morga was quiet. Then she held out her hand. Ashka placed the joined ring in it. The old woman's thumb found the 3 cuts beneath the tusk. I made these, she said. Gorak watched me. Haldren watched me. They drank from the peace cup. Then they killed the speakers before dawn. Svala crouched. Will you say that before both armies? Morga smiled without humour. Child, I have been saving my breath for 2 winters. Outside, horns sounded from every side. Gorak's guards surrounded the redoubt, but another sound rose beneath them. Ordinary soldiers were arguing at the gate. Elders demanded Morga be shown. Mothers shouted Ashka's name. The old rite had become stronger than the war chief's command. Eirik climbed onto the wall. Gorak stood below with 100 red-armoured guards. Behind them, thousands of orcs filled the slope. Send down the witnesses, Gorak called, and the child lives. Eirik looked at the soldiers behind him. You have promised that child life twice today, he shouted. Both times you ordered arrows before the promise finished. Laughter moved through the crowd, dark and bitter. Gorak raised his sword. You have no voice here! Then why are you answering me? The laughter grew. Ashka joined Eirik on the wall, supported by Svala. Morga stood between them, wrapped in a blanket. The camp went silent at the sight of her. Gorak's face emptied. Morga lifted one hand. My son, she called, her old voice carrying farther than seemed possible. You buried me because truth would not obey you. Some of Gorak's guards lowered their eyes. Morga continued. I witnessed peace at Gray Fjord. Gorak and Haldren witnessed it beside me. They murdered the speakers and fed your children to the war that followed. The valley erupted. Gorak screamed for the archers. No arrows came. He turned. The archers stood with bows lowered. Not all of them, but enough. Eirik understood the opening. He called down, At noon tomorrow, bring your army to the old bridge at Gray Fjord. Let Stenvar bring his. Let every soldier hear the oath where it was broken. Gorak stared up at him. Why would I agree? You already have. Your messengers and Stenvars share roads, ink, and kill orders. We will send word that you refuse to face the man you call your enemy. By sunset, both armies will know which 2 people fear the same ring. Gorak could attack the redoubt and perhaps kill them. But now his entire army was watching. Every corpse would become proof. Ashka raised the joined ring above her head. Gray Fjord! She shouted. The elders answered first, then the mothers. Then soldiers across the valley began striking spear against shield, not for blood, for hearing. Gorak lowered his sword. His face promised murder. But his voice said, Gray Fjord. Word travelled faster than armies. By sunrise, Hessa's copied decree hung from market posts north of the river. Svala's surviving warriors read Stenvar's secret order in farmyards and fishing camps. Orc elders carried the story of Morga's prison from tent to tent. Mothers who had lost sons to 12 years of war began asking the same question in 2 languages. If the enemy was truly beyond speaking to, why had their leaders been speaking in secret all along? At noon, Gray Fjord filled with shields. The Vikings lined the northern ridge beneath white wolf banners. The Orcs covered the southern slope in red and black. Between them lay the narrow strip of grass where the peace camp had once stood. Eirik remembered every tree. He remembered the flat stone where Torvald and Rukhan had shared a cup. He remembered the path he had guarded while they screamed. He remembered Stenvar returning through the pines with blood on his sleeve and praise on his tongue. The place had waited 12 years for him to stop lying. Ashka stood beside the flat stone with Korr in her arms. Her ankle was bound, her face bruised, her back straight. Morga sat on a chair carried by 4 elders. Svala stood at Eirik's right, wearing no clan badge. She had scraped the iron hand from her shield, leaving bare wood. Hessa arrived with farmers behind her. She carried the public kill decree in one hand and a small wooden board in the other. 2 names had been carved into it, Leaf and Orm. Eirik nodded to her. She did not nod back. Forgiveness was not the price of truth. Stenvar rode down from the northern ridge wearing polished mail and the white wolf cloak. His law speaker followed, along with 20 household guards. Gorak came on foot from the south, surrounded by red-armored warriors. He had left the bronze cap off his tusk. Without it, he looked older. The 2 leaders stopped on opposite sides of the flat stone. They did not look at each other. That was their first mistake. Men who had supposedly hated one another for 12 years should have found it difficult not to stare. Instead, each watched the witnesses. Stenvar spoke first. This gathering is a trap made by an oathless warrior and an enemy witch. Gorak answered immediately. The human speaks one truth. My sister has been corrupted. A bitter laugh moved through both armies. The leaders glanced at one another then, each realizing too late how neatly their words fit together. Ashka stepped onto the flat stone. You ordered us killed in matching language, she said. You searched the same farms for the same ring. You sent messengers along the same roads. Yet today you ask us to believe you have never shared purpose. Stenvar raised his chin. Show this ring. Eirik placed his half in Ashka's hand. She joined it to hers and gave it to Morga. The old mother traced the markings, then held it toward the armies. I cut the 3 marks beneath the tusk, she said. Torvald Raven's son carried one half. Rukhan, husband of Ashka, carried the other. Haldren Varson and my son Gorak witnessed their oath. Stenvar smiled. It was the calm smile he had worn before executions. An old prisoner can be taught any speech. Morga turned her blind eyes toward him. Your left hand has 2 shortened fingers. You lost their tips when Torvald closed the peace chest on them because you reached for the silver before the oath was read. The smile disappeared. Thousands of Vikings looked towards Stenvar's glove. Eirik had never known why he wore it, even in summer. Morga faced Gorak. And you spilled goat milk on your red boots. Rukhan laughed. You promised to make him swallow his teeth after the meeting. He told you peace required a stronger stomach than war. An orc elder barked a sudden laugh. Others joined before grief swallowed the sound. Gorak's hand moved toward his sword. Ashka held Korr close. Rukhan knew you hated him for saying that. He did not know you would murder him for it. Stenvar pointed at the ring. Even if the oath is real, it proves only that words were spoken. Orcs broke them before sunrise. Gorak seized the opening. Vikings drew first blood. Both armies began shouting. The old argument rose again, familiar and hungry. Eirik saw how easily it could consume the truth. One side needed only to blame the other first, and every warrior would retreat into the grief he already understood. He stepped onto the stone. The shouting changed. Some Vikings called him traitor. Orcs called him butcher. Others only watched. Eirik faced the northern ridge. My name is Eirik Wolfscar. I guarded the western path at Gray Fjord. Stenvar's law speaker shouted, The berserker admits he served the Jarl faithfully. No, Eirik said. I admit I served him obediently. The distinction quieted the ridge. I saw Torvald and Rukhan enter under white cloth. I saw Haldren, now called Stenvar, enter after them in a grey coat. I saw Gorak cross from the southern trees. I heard laughter from the camp. I heard a cup raised. Later, I heard screams. The fjord seemed to hold his words above the water. My men asked whether we should go to them. I said we had orders. A messenger came from Stenvar and said no one was to leave by the west road. I held the path. Hessa gripped the board bearing her sons' names. Svala watched without expression. Eirik continued. Stenvar returned with blood on his sleeve and Torvald's half of the oath ring. He gave it to me. I wore it for 12 years and repeated his lie. When people saw me beside him, they believed I had witnessed orc betrayal. I let them believe. A Viking veteran shouted, Why confess now? Eirik looked at Korr. Because 2 days ago, I was ordered to kill a mother and child so the lie could live 1 day longer. Ashka met his eyes. Eirik faced both armies. I refused too late to save Torvald, too late to save Rukkan, too late to save Hessa's sons, Svala's brother, my wife, or the thousands whose names I do not know. But I refused in time to save these two. He pointed toward Ashka and Korr. And that was enough to make both your leaders fear me more than they fear each other. The words moved through the soldiers, not like fire, like thawing ice, slowly at first. Then with cracks no one could stop. A young Viking lowered his spear. An Orc archer beside the southern stones unstrung her bow. Stenvar saw them. "Wolfscar speaks from battle madness," he shouted. "You have all seen him rage. You know the beast inside him," Eirik nodded. "You are right!" The admission startled everyone. "There is a beast inside me. You fed it names. You pointed it at farms and halls and told me rage was loyalty. Today it wants your throat." Stenvar's guards drew swords. Eirik spread his empty hands. "But wanting is not choosing." Svala stepped onto the stone beside him. "I saw Stenvar's order," she said. "After I read the joined oath, he commanded his hunters to kill me and my warriors." Nil's red hair dyed at Raven Ford because he saw proof. She held up the blood-stained leather strip. Hessa raised the public decree. "He ordered an infant killed without hearing. One by one, other hands rose in the crowd. Copies of the decree. Search lists bearing Viking runes and Orc tally marks. Names of farms visited by both sides before the battle. The lie had been designed to survive one witness. It could not survive hundreds. Gorak drew his sword. "Red Tusk!" he roared. "Kill the corrupted and take the child!" Stenvar drew his at the same instant. "White wolves! Loose arrows!" Their second mistake was giving the same order together. Their final mistake was believing obedience had no end. A few archers raised bows. Most did not. Stenvar turned on his own line. "Loose!" Gorak screamed the command again. 20 bowstrings snapped. Eirik moved before the arrows flew. He pulled the flat stone's ceremonial shield from its stand and covered Ashka, Korr, and Morga. Svala raised her bare shield beside his. Arrows struck wood. One punched through Eirik's shield and cut his upper arm. Another buried itself in Svala's shoulder. She grunted but held the line. Then a third shield joined them. It belonged to an Orc guard who had stood at Gorak's redoubt. A fourth came from a Viking farmer's son. A fifth. A sixth. Within seconds, a wall formed around the witnesses. Viking round shields overlapped Orc hide shields. Men and women who had tried to kill one another 2 days earlier now stood shoulder to shoulder because their leaders had finally aimed the war inward. Stenvar stared at the mixed wall. Gorak looked terrified. "Traitors!" both men shouted. No one answered. Their household guards charged. The shield wall braced. Eirik handed his shield to the soldier behind him and stepped through the gap. Svala caught his cloak. "You said wanting is not choosing? I remember!" "Then remember it loudly." Eirik faced the charging guards. The berserker rage opened fully. The world became sharp. He heard each boot strike. He saw the tremor in one sword hand, the loose buckle on another shield, the old injury in a third man's knee. The rage offered death after death, each one easy. Eirik chose differently. He caught the first sword between his palms and twisted until the guard released it. He struck the man's helmet with the hilt, dropping him alive. He ducked beneath a spear, broke the shaft, and swept the wielder's legs. A red-armoured Orc swung an axe at his neck. Eirik stepped inside the blow, lifted the warrior bodily, and threw him into 2 Viking guards. The armies watched the most feared killer in the North fight without killing. That frightened the commanders more than slaughter would have. Stenvar came for him personally. The Jarl's sword was narrow and fast. It cut Eirik across the ribs, then the thigh. Stenvar had trained for years while others believed command had softened him. "You were nothing before me," he hissed. Eirik blocked the next cut with a broken spear shaft. "I was worse than nothing. I was useful." Stenvar drove a knee into his wound. Eirik fell. The Jarl raised his sword for the killing blow. Svala threw her knife. It struck the sword's crossguard and knocked the blade aside. Eirik surged upward, caught Stenvar around the waist, and drove him onto the flat stone. His hand closed around the Jarl's throat. The rage begged. One squeeze. 12 years of dead voices seemed to gather around him. Liv, Torvald, Rukhan, Leif, Orm, Nils, all the unnamed. Stenvar smiled beneath Eirik's hand. Yes, he whispered. Show them what you are. Eirik understood. Stenvar wanted death. A dead Jarl could become a martyr murdered by the mad beast he had warned everyone about. His followers could rebuild the lie around his body. A living Stenvar would have to hear every name. Eirik released him. No, he said. You will live long enough to become unnecessary. He broke Stenvar's sword across the stone. On the other side of the shield wall, Gorak pushed through his own guards and seized Morga by the hair. Ashka screamed. Gorak dragged his mother from behind the shields and put a dagger beneath her ribs. Stand down, he shouted, or the old liar dies, Morga laughed. It was a dry, fearless sound. My son, she said, you buried me once. It did not make you right. Gorak's face twisted. He thrust the dagger. Ashka struck his arm with her splint. The blade turned and cut Morga's side instead of entering her heart. Gorak backhanded Ashka to the ground. Korr slipped from her arms. Eirik ran. He caught the child before he struck the stone. Gorak swung at Eirik with the dagger. Eirik turned so the blade entered the flesh beneath his shoulder rather than reaching Korr. Pain flashed white. Eirik held the baby with one arm and caught Gorak's wrist with the other. The war chief strained against him. You killed my husband, Ashka said from the ground. Gorak looked at her. For the first time, he did not deny it. He would have made us weak. No, Ashka said. He would have made you ordinary. The words broke something. Gorak roared and pushed harder. Eirik could have crushed his wrist. Instead, he held until 3 Orc soldiers approached. Gorak looked at them. Take the child! The soldiers took Gorak. One removed the dagger from his hand. Another bound his arms. The third knelt beside Morga and pressed cloth to her wound. Gorak stared at his own warriors as if they had changed species. I am your war chief. The guard from the redoubt shook his head. You were. Across the stone, Viking soldiers surrounded Stenvar. His law speaker quietly removed the white wolf badge from his coat. No horn declared victory. No army cheered. The moment was too large for celebration. Men and women simply began lowering weapons. The sound travelled across Gray Fjord in thousands of small impacts, spearheads touching earth, swords entering grass, bows laid upon stone. Eirik stood in the centre, holding Korr while blood ran down his arm. Ashka came to him. He gave her the child. She pressed her forehead to Korr's, then to Eirik's. You refused, she whispered. Once. Once was where it began. The leaders were taken away under a guard made from both armies. Neither side trusted the other to hold them alone, which was perhaps the first honest agreement of the new peace. Morga survived her wound. She insisted on being carried to the old peace stone before healers touched her. There, with blood soaking her blanket, she watched Ashka place the joined iron ring into a carved hollow at the centre. Svala
Enjoying
stood
the
beside
story?
Eirik with her shoulder bowed.
Leave a like and subscribe to
now?
Orc Chronicles
She asked.
for more deep
Eirik
fantasy
looked at the armies
tales.
mixing uneasily
The next
along
story
the shore.
is waiting.
Some searched for wounded friends. Some traded water. Some still watched one another with hatred learned over a lifetime. Now comes the difficult part. We just stood between 2 armies. That was simple. We knew where the arrows came from. Peace did not arrive as a song. It arrived as work. For 7 days, both armies remained at Gray Fjord while elders counted the dead and compared records. Hidden storehouses were opened. Letters between Stenvar and Gorak were found beneath the floors of their command tents. The messages revealed years of arranged raids, abandoned patrol routes, exchanged prisoners selected to carry the worst possible stories home. Every discovery created new grief. Some soldiers wanted immediate executions. Ashka opposed them. "If we begin peace by killing prisoners without hearing," she said, "then we have learned only to choose different victims." Eirik supported her. Many hated him for it. That no longer controlled him. Stenvar and Gorak were tried before a joint gathering. They were made to hear the names of the peace envoys, the soldiers killed in arranged battles, and civilians lost after false warnings. Hessa read Leif and Orm herself. Svala read her brother's name and Nils's. Ashka read Rukan's. Eirik read Liv's. Neither leader was granted the clean death he had once offered Ashka. They were stripped of rank and sent to rebuild the river road their war had destroyed, guarded by families from both peoples. Every traveller who passed would see them labour beneath the names of the dead. Some called the sentence too merciful. Eirik understood the confusion. Mercy was often mistaken for release. This mercy gave them nowhere to hide. The white wolf banner came down. So did the red war flag. In their place, the clans raised a plain cloth bearing a broken ring joined at the centre. Svala became captain of a mixed river guard. Her first rule was that no order involving prisoners could be carried out without 2 witnesses from each people. Her second was that anyone who called her soft would train against her before breakfast. Few made the mistake twice. Hessa reopened her mill. Orc farmers brought grain from the southern valley. Viking carpenters repaired the wheel. She remained suspicious of everyone equally, which made her unexpectedly valuable at council meetings. Morga moved into a house beside the clan stones and spent her remaining years insulting chiefs before they became too pleased with themselves. Ashka refused every title offered to her. She accepted only the role of speaker for mothers who had lost family on either side. When councils argued about land, payment, or old blood debts, she brought Korr into the hall and reminded them that every decision had descendants. And Eirik? The Vikings offered to restore his oath. He refused. The old oath had demanded obedience before conscience. He would not repair a chain simply because familiar hands offered it. Instead, he built a house at the western path of Gray Fjord, exactly where he had once stood silent. Travellers from north and south stopped there for food, news, and judgment when disputes threatened to become blood feuds. Above the door hung no axe. The woodcutter's blade Hessa had given him rested beside the hearth and was used mostly for splitting kindling. Korr grew strong enough to pull Eirik's beard before he learned to walk. Because the old iron ring was gone, he grabbed whatever braid he could reach. Ashka apologized the first few times. Eirik told her the boy had excellent battle instincts. Years later, children would ask why people called him Wolfscar when he kept goats, repaired fences, and carried babies more often than weapons. Eirik would show them the scars on his arms and say strength had once meant being the man everyone feared would strike. Then he would point toward the joined ring banner over the river. Real strength, he would tell them, was the day I learned I could stop. The story spread far beyond Gray Fjord. Some versions made Eirik taller than a pine tree. Some claimed Ashka commanded ravens. Others said Korr caught an arrow with his bare hand, though Korr himself encouraged that version whenever adults were not listening. But the truth was powerful enough without decoration. A Viking berserker was ordered to kill an orc mother. He refused. Both armies turned against him because mercy threatened the lie that kept them marching. Then one mother spoke, one warrior confessed, one shield maiden chose conscience, and ordinary soldiers discovered that an army is only powerful while people continue to obey. Peace did not begin when the leaders were defeated. It began when an axe stopped. And whenever the joined ring banner moved above Gray Fjord, those who had survived remembered that the distance between a massacre and a future could be as small as one word. No. If this story stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and remember Eirik's choice the next time cruelty is called duty.